Okay, let me just give us a second or two. Okay, so hi, Mike. I believe that we are live. So thank you so much for joining the human mode conversation. Before we start, I've already told you why we're starting these human mode conversations because
Uh-huh.
it is an uncertain time. So I wanted to give a little bit of maybe perspective, mindset shift, insights to leaders who are somehow trying their best to get ready for what's happening now.
Yep.
Okay, so I would love the idea of talking to you. Me and you, we know each other since 2017, I believe.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yes, it's a long time ago. You ran a boutique consulting firm
hmm
at a time. You recently wrote a book that
hmm
I'm sure you have a copy and we want to talk about it. You're also doing some research on the meaning of work,
hmm
and you're now working as a transformation leadership advisor at
Yes,
a European consulting firm called Egon Zehnder. Is that correct?
that is
Okay,
all correct. That is all
awesome.
correct. Yes,
Perfect.
yes,
So,
good.
welcome to the human mode with everything going on. Mike, like, what are you sensing? Like, the first thing that you're somehow sensing about what's happening, especially in the world of work. Like, what are you seeing? How are you feeling about it?
I, I mean, I think that the way that you expressed it is a really good way of phrasing it, that there's a lot going on, right?
Yes.
That there is a ton of things going on. And what I'm seeing in my practice is, I mean, I think there's been a lot going on for a while. I think that there's more of a
Yes.
lot going on than there has been, right? I think if you
Mhm.
think about, you know, obviously technological change with AI, you think about all the climate change stuff that we're living through. I think, but also if you think about sort of geopolitical change and the kind of the rules of the way that the world should work that we were brought up understanding are also changing. I
Yes.
think that all of that is really adding up to just a whole bunch of confusion out there.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that's causing people to think about change in a slightly different way.
And it's interesting that you're saying because I remember when we met first time, we talked about future of work. Like I remember
hmm
when I was switching from engineering to like this work, like there
hmm
were many articles about future of work about 2030. Like
hmm
how come we didn't somehow prepare ourselves better? Like why didn't we get the memo?
Yeah. And it's funny, I've got a sort of a particular view on that these days that
Hmm.
I'll ride for a bit and we can see how it works, right? But if you remember back in those days, there was a book out and the book captured a movement or an idea that I'm pushing against these days, which is this notion of grit or resilience, right?
Yes.
Angela Duckworth wrote a very
Yes.
important book on that that was popular around that moment. And there was a lot of stuff um, around the idea of how do you survive change, right? Resilience is this physics idea that the quality of resilience of a material is its ability to bounce back to what it was before. So you bend a bar, and then if it's resilient, it can come back to being unbent, right? And so this notion of withstanding change, this notion of kind of getting through things, I think that's no longer the right answer.
Hmm.
And I think part of what we got wrong at that time is that we were trying to figure out, okay, there's a big thing shift happening. We'll get through it. And then we get almost to the other side of it. And a lot of my writing and thinking these days is around the fact that there is no other side, right? That it's just change after
And
change after
you.
change after
Yes.
change after change.
But and actually this is very interesting because like I think that COVID also had like provided a similar opportunity that we
Massive.
can do things differently.
hmm
But again, the whole idea was constantly is that let's go back to the old days. And we were just,
hmm
I remember talking to leaders said that there was no glorious days in the back old days.
Right,
Like if we're
right, right.
talking about culture, if we're talking about employee engagement, if we're talking about the way things are being doing, like it's like it was not necessarily a utopia that you want to definitely, like, just think back, do your best to go back to it.
Of course, yeah.
Are we again going back, like, are we going through a similar like mindset now that AI is going to come, it's going to settle, and we're going to go back to what work used to be? Or you think that this time is really disruptive and there is no chance for like going back to the old with the definition that we have in mind?
Um, I think there's a bunch of different ways of thinking about that, right? And I think that the challenge with conversations like these with people like me is that we're trying to extrapolate from a series of circumstances to some broad-based sweep
Yes.
that people who are listening can then take and say, okay, now I get it. I understand what's
Yes.
happening, right? And the reality is that life is lived at a very, very micro individual level, right?
Hmm.
And so my own personal view on that is similar to other significant technological, cultural, social revolutions in the past, the industrial revolution. I mean, people compare AI to electricity or the industrial revolution or the internet or what. I mean, whichever one of those things is a good comparison, I don't know, right? I'm certainly not an expert in these things, but each of those things brought significant cultural, social,
Hmm.
and obviously on the back of a technological revolution that meant that we did not go back to the way things were,
Hmm.
but that we went through this moment of extreme upheaval and then probably got to a place of relative stability afterwards for a while, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that will we get to a place of relative stability on the other side of whatever's happening? For sure. I think it's in our nature to seek stability and to seek to slow down the pace of
Hmm.
change. However, those moments, new technology to stability, that time in between is a time of significant upheaval, and I think that's what we're going to live through. How long will that last? I'm not enough of a historian to say, well, all these other comparables did this, but I would assume that probably for most of our lifetimes, we'll be in moments of where we'll be like, I don't understand the rules anymore
Oh, so you
because those
think
rules
that
are
it's going
changing
to
so
take
quickly.
decades, you think?
I think so. I mean, I think that we're going to see, and technological adoption is so much faster than it used to be, right? So, the invention of the steam engine, by the time that steam engine made it through to all sorts of other things, took a very long time. I mean, it came out really ChatGPT November 2022, right? So we're
Yes.
kind of like at the 3 year mark ish. Like, I mean, that's just, like the speed of
Nothing.
that is
No.
so quick, but it'll take long enough, and then the trickling out of all those
Yes.
effects will take a very, very
Hmm.
long time. Um,
But
there's a statistic. Go
yes.
ahead. Sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying there's a statistic that I like to use when I talk about these things, which is I think it was like in 1880 there were 200,000 blacksmiths in the UK. In 1890 there were 50,000. Right. So in the space of 10 years, a new technology, cars, meant that the people who make horseshoes no longer had jobs, right? And that was 75% of that population of blacksmiths were no
Hmm.
longer employed as blacksmiths. And we're talking the late 19th century, which is not a place where you could go back to school and retrain in a bunch of things, right?
Yes.
Like this is like a huge population of people who had stuff to do and then had no stuff to do and had to figure something else out. The current population of blacksmiths in the UK is probably around 1,000,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And so it
Yes.
took a long time for that 50,000 to decrease and decrease and decrease. But the first
Hmm.
initial jump was radical, right? And again, we think that AI is some kind of like new and it will be fast, but technological change has had dramatic impacts on work every time it's come through.
Yeah. But like then I mean, like I totally agree with everything that you're saying, but
Hmm.
the challenge that I see with many like workplaces and leaders is that they need to perform with the current systems,
Hmm.
and they need to deliver projects, and they need to make profit, but at
Absolutely.
the same time they need to reskill, upskill, transform. Like, how is that possible, especially for leadership? Like going
Yeah.
through these two parallel worlds of performance and transformation.
I think that's a really good question. I think the short answer
Million
is
dollar
it's
one.
really hard,
Yes.
right? Like, I think that there's a lot of people, and what I see is a lot of people, especially people who are kind of closer to what could conceivably be the end of a career, right? So people who are
Hmm.
closer retirement age are sort of saying, "Oh, if I could just hold on," right?
Hmm.
Like, I just okay, I get it, but I don't want to, you get to the point where you don't want to learn how to program the VCR. You know what I mean? Like, your
Hmm.
kids are going to learn how to do it. So you're like, look, I'm just going to leave it to my kids to do this. Um,
Hmm.
the only answer I think I can give to your point is yes, it's really, really hard, but that's exactly what people need to do, right? There's this sort of
Hmm.
almost, I would say, three speed life in the sense that speed number one is I'm delivering on the things that I usually do, and I have to make sure that I'm delivering that and it's going well, right? So
Hmm.
that's using a current set of tools, whatever it is, this stuff is still happening. Speed number two is I have these technologies that are out there that I know of, right? And I have to figure out how to integrate them into my current processes to optimize those processes, make them more efficient, lean out costs, whatever it is, right? So
Hmm.
I need to use that because otherwise, that thing that I'm doing, that I'm still doing, somebody else is going to use this tool and take that away from me, right? The classic line is AI is not going to take your job. Somebody using AI is going to take your job,
Yes.
right? The third speed, and this is where I think some of the mindset stuff comes into play, is that what we conceive of what AI can do today is not what it's going to be able to do 2 years from now,
Hmm.
right? Even since November 2022, the shift in the power and ability and skill set and set of solutions that AI can bring has been dramatic,
Hmm.
right? And there's, again, a lot of much smarter people than me who talk about and write about what that next frontier of AI is. But as someone who's in a leadership role in an organization, I think you also have to be looking at that future opportunity in your context and saying, okay, not only do I have to learn how to apply the technology that is currently available, but I have to start thinking now, what is the next technology and how do I organize myself such that
Hmm.
that integration is going to be much easier than it would be if I just focus on today and then, oh my gosh, there's this new thing and then I have to put it in place.
That's actually very insightful. Like, because we also look at it, at Glee Factor with the same lens that it's like current performance,
Hmm.
like kind of a transformation and what's next.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that I love how you're phrasing this, that it's really around what's the next for technology, but what would be the next for humans as well?
Yeah, yeah, a
Like,
great,
what is
yeah,
that, what is that gonna look like? Like once we somehow understand the capability or capacity of AI partners or agents,
yeah,
like what's next for us
yeah.
as professionals?
Good question, right? And again, like wow, who knows, right? I
Yes.
think uh, a couple of thoughts on that that aren't the answers that you and probably other people listening to this would be looking for. But one of them is as you think about that from a strategic perspective of how am I going to apply these new technologies to
Hmm.
the things that I do, I had this saying that culture is strategy, right?
Yes.
In the sense that to sort of say, okay, well, I'm going to make this strategic change, and then we'll just see what happens with the culture is not an answer, right? The
Yes.
answer has to be those two integrated together. So as you say, look, we're going to start every meeting we have, we're going to have some AI bot as a member of that meeting, and they're going to take notes and things like that, but they're also going to have opinions and they're going to suggest things and things like that. Okay, but what is that going to do to the way that the people who work in your organization think about themselves?
Hmm.
That's a really important question to be thought of and to be, I guess, proactively engaging with and making decisions about. So
Yes.
not just letting culture kind of flow along beside and hope it catches up, but actually saying, okay, we got to create this culture of whatever it is that you're looking to do. And I think that's really important. The second level of that is on an individual basis, right? And
Hmm.
you alluded to the fact that I'm doing some studying. What I find really interesting is this notion of meaning in work, right? How do we take meaning from the things that we do? And how do I feel a sense of, I don't know, not just fulfillment, but purposefulness,
Yes.
right? That like what I'm doing has a reason.
Hmm.
And it's not just doing stuff to satisfy the kind of Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? I'm not just paying my rent and buying food, but actually
self-actualization kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, or whatever it is, right? And so the interesting thing is that if you look at the people who write a lot about this, and people have been writing about this for a very long time, Aristotle onwards, right? Confucius, people like that, but even more recently, the understanding of what brings meaning into work is fairly settled, right? I mean, people would fight it on the margins, but I think most people say it has something to do with what Daniel Pink, in a kind of more, I guess, what they call in French vulgarisation, right? A sort of more kind of mastery, autonomy, and purpose, right? That,
Hmm.
I need to have some sense that I have capabilities and I'm good at something and I'm
Hmm.
building a strength and things like this. I have autonomy, right? That I, as a human being, I can make decisions about the things that I do. And then I have a purpose that goes beyond just putting widgets somewhere, right? There's this classic story of the guy sweeping the floor at NASA and says, I'm putting a man on the moon, right? Like my
Yes.
purpose extends beyond the task. And
Yes.
the fourth thing that I think a lot of people are adding in, or different thinkers add in, is this notion of connectedness, right? That I have some kind of connection to this. AI is attacking all four of those,
Hmm.
right? And I would have to go, we can get into the details if you want, but I think about this a lot. And AI, the consequence of AI, decrease the value or the power of each of those four things, such that I think with this AI revolution, there's a lot of people who currently have a sense of meaning in their
Hmm.
work. And as AI comes in, we'll start to lose that and feel really alone and sad as a
Yes.
consequence. And to me, that's a really interesting
And
challenge.
there's something called like FOBO, because they said that when social media came, it was the question of FOMO, like fear of
Yeah.
missing out because you were exposed. And now it's the idea of FOBO. So we're constantly fear of becoming obsolete,
Ah, interesting.
which
Yes.
is
Yes.
which is I think like in the same lines as you're
Yeah.
saying that like, if you are being attacked or like how you somehow defined work is being challenged by AI, how
Yeah.
can you just redefine work for self? Okay, like you said many things. And I have many follow-up questions to that I tried to see if I can just still remember.
Yeah.
So, one thing, the first thing is the question of culture,
Hmm.
strategy and culture. Like, we both worked in this industry, in this domain for many years, and we've
Hmm.
met many leaders that they were not intentional about
Hmm.
their cultures. Like, they never necessarily saw the like correlation between like having a good culture, like embracing certain behaviors and performance, learning, innovation,
Hmm.
culture, even as an infrastructure for transformation.
Hmm.
We are now getting to the point that, to your point, building that cultural infrastructure for what's coming. It's not just a nice to have. It's not just
Yeah.
oh my, how can we create this mindset shift? Like, this is a very big challenge because, I love the fact that one of the mindset shift that I think that I hope that our audience will leave with is that there's no such a thing as going back. We're
Yeah.
we're entering a new. That's
Yeah.
the first. But then for that, we need technological infrastructure, but also the cultural infrastructure. How can we build that cultural infrastructure if the old us has been always pushing away
Yeah.
and never prioritized the concepts of how people work together?
Well, and I think you're hitting it right on the head there, right? I think that this notion of the importance of culture as a strategic tool, or almost at that level of strategy in terms of its importance, in terms of our ability to be successful, I think is people are waking up to it, right? I read this quote the other day from somebody who runs an investment bank, and he said something to the lines of, the fact that people disregard culture in a industry, investment banking, where the only thing we sell is people and their brains and their abilities, is still shocking to me,
Hmm.
right? And those are organizations, not all investment banks, but those types of organizations, types of places where people really historically completely ignored culture as a
Yes.
tool,
Hmm.
right? And I think that this is becoming a real differentiator in organizations. And so we're seeing a mindset shift, I think, in the market of people waking up to the importance and the impact of getting culture right. And
Hmm.
big organizations like McKinsey have been working, writing books on this and the talent advantage and things like that, that are essentially saying, look, getting the right people in the right culture is such an amazing lever to success.
Yeah.
So that's the mindset is shifting. How do we help it shift more? Well, we have conversations like this, and people listen to it and they say, "Well, maybe that's right," and they go off and they buy
Mhm.
books or read things or listen to other podcasts or whatever it is, right? I think that we'll probably see more and more of that.
Mhm.
The question of how do you then do it, I think, is something that also is something that's really particular to organizations, right? So there's this macro view of you got to get culture right. And
Yes.
then there's this very micro thing of kind of like, okay, but what do we have to do in our organization? And I think that actually the the danger with this is that a lot of people who write and think about culture have a pre-existing idea of what the right type of culture is, right? So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of studies about things like psychological safety, like
Yeah.
things like, the at McKinsey had this idea of the obligation to dissent and stuff like this, right? That we speak about in the book, and we talk about how there are these ingredients that have been shown to be successful in cultures at a larger scale. But I think that that's a bit simplistic, right?
Yes.
And I think that there's a danger of folks like us going into organizations and saying, your culture should look like this kind of paradigm of a good culture, as
Mhm.
opposed to really asking a question of which is, what is your strategy? What are your objectives? What are the tools, infrastructure, culturally that you already have in place? How do you build on those rather than
Mhm.
coming in and saying, okay, we're going to sweep all that clean and we're going to impose this sort of
Yes.
cultural ideal world? At least in my experience, that very rarely works.
Yes. And I totally agree with you. And how I look at it now and how we look at it as well is just this idea that you become an enabler of certain behaviors or a certain way of thinking. But at the end of the day, the integrators always have to be the people within because
Yes.
they know their contexts and they
Yeah.
know like their strategy or like the way that they function. And I totally agree with you that like it is a complex system now going into organizations and say that you're going through all this transformation and by the way this is how things have to look like because this is
Yeah.
already quite overwhelming, but then the next question is that how can we as external like forces bring those tools
Hmm.
without pressuring, without put like I mean I understand that we need to push these people because they are
Yeah.
going through change, but without really breaking down the systems.
Yeah. The way I think about this type of cultural work is I think about it as past, present, and future.
Yes, exactly.
And
Yes.
and in the process of doing this work, I think the first thing you want to do is you want to really understand the past, right? Like,
Mhm.
where does this organization come from? What has been successful? When you go around and you talk to people in this organization, you say, what are the values of this organization, right? What are the things that make this place a great place to work to the extent that it is, all this
Yes.
kind of stuff. And you capture that idea.
Hmm.
The present is where are we right now and what are we doing from a cultural perspective, right? And actually trying to identify what are the tools that are currently being used as cultural artifacts or cultural technologies or all that kind of thing that are having some benefit and what are the ones that aren't and what's landing and what's not and things like
Yes.
this. And then the third place, I think this is where that gets to your question a little bit more. Who do we want to be?
Hmm.
And that's a really interesting conversation around strategy, right? Around where it is we're trying to go as an organization. And also around just leadership and their aspirations, right?
Yes.
Patrick Pichette, who was the CFO of Google, once said, your CEO is your culture. Now,
Hmm.
I think that's a bit simplistic, right?
Yeah.
Because the CEO who just arrived 2 days ago is certainly not the culture of the organization, but has a massive impact on the
Hmm.
culture over time, right? And will be both a reflection, but also a reflector into the culture. And so spending real time with the leader of the organization or the leadership group of the organization and saying, what do you want? And how do you want to run this? But importantly, for people like us, is also for us to take that bit of a step back and not presuppose the right answer to that,
Yeah.
right? They may say, hey, we want to be this hard charging organization that only rewards extreme excellence, and that anybody who's not good enough gets out.
Hmm.
Now, not necessarily the culture that I would want to work in, but you know what? It works for some people and it will
Yeah.
attract people who like that type of environment and it will repel people who don't. But if that's in alignment with your strategy, hey,
Hmm.
it's not for me to tell you to do it differently.
Hmm. Very
But
interesting.
the two things have to work together, right? That's the real point about culture and strategy is that you can't do one and hope that the other is just going to happen naturally. The two, or to be as effective as possible, you have to be mindful and thoughtful around how you're building those two together.
Together. So follow up to this question, I don't know, I have a few ideas that I want to run by you. Like, do you
Okay.
think that like there is a great opportunity for small, medium businesses going through this transformation and future to have to lead the way compared to corporations because of their size, because of their agility, because of the mindset? Like, do you think that as we're looking in the future, maybe the importance or, like the idea of like the small, medium businesses leading the way might be higher than like in existing large infrastructures?
Uh, so short answer is yes. I think that to unpack it a little bit, I think
Hmm.
the real question are more agile organizations going to be more successful
Yes.
than non-agile organizations? Yes. Are smaller organizations usually more agile than large organizations? Yes. Right. So, ergo,
Yes.
right, little symbolic logic, and then we get to the point that smaller organizations are probably going to be more successful. But the exceptions are very many in both of those
Hmm.
categories, right? And so there are very large, very dynamic organizations. And then there's also small, very, very undynamic organizations, right? I think what we'll see with the impact of AI technologies, and again, I hesitate to say stuff about this because I don't know enough about this, the technologies and the things that they can do. But what I can see is that the impact that an individual can have using technology is much larger than an impact of an individual without technology,
Hmm.
which means that to achieve the same thing, I can do the same thing with less people
Yes.
as long as I'm giving those people the tools. And that's been true of all technologies, not all
Exactly.
technologies, but most technologies so far have been, they increase that productivity of the individual.
Hmm.
So a small organization with really robust AI tools can do something that very large organizations would take lots and lots of people to do. The question of whether or not those organizations will be able to adapt in that three-speed model that we talked about earlier, I think really depends on the people who are running those organizations,
Hmm.
right? Will those organizations be able to say, I'm in, I'm going to really take advantage of this opportunity? And whether that's a technology opportunity, and I'm sure there's people listening who say, look, I run a restaurant,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't
Exactly.
think that AI is going to totally change the way that things happen in a short. Fair enough. However, I would still be thinking as a restaurant owner, what's changing in the world today? And how
Yes.
do I react and adapt to that change? And maybe that's in question of supply chain and the types of foods that I cook or the things that I do or the way in which I serve people, right?
Yeah.
The DoorDash, the Uber Eats of the world. Am I embracing that as a thing? Am I not? Like, and again, I'm not, I keep disclaiming this, but I'm not a restaurant expert either.
Yes.
But I think you could say, I'm just going to run it the same way that we've been running it for 50 years.
Yeah.
Or you could say, I'm really going to lean into trying to understand what's changing and try little things and see what happens. And that's the kind of organization I think will be very successful in the long run.
So that intentionality
Yeah.
constantly about
Yes.
what's
Right.
happening.
Plug the book, right?
Yeah,
Yes. Intention. That's the
exactly.
whole thing. Yeah.
Intention. That's the
Thank
whole
you,
thing.
Nogol.
Yes. No, no, but I think that this is, like when we go into organizations, like I think that the leaders that will start to feel ready for the future with lots of like concerns and lots of overwhelm are not the ones that they have all the answers, but at least they have that willingness to search
Well,
for
yeah.
them. Like they have
Yeah.
that, like it's the question, we always say that change comes from willingness, like, the willingness and the capacity and the readiness. So I guess
Curiosity.
this is exactly like this is what like so that's why I love your book, because that intentionality is not that okay, like we're getting it or we're just doing it right. It's just that you put like you are showing that curiosity for what's coming and you have that
Yeah.
openness to just see
And
what's gonna unfold.
and it never stops, right? And
Yes.
that's the thing. I think that, the metaphor that I've been using a bunch recently is this notion of you're standing at the edge of the beach in the surf, um, and you're kind of resisting the waves, right? Like waves are coming, you're swoosh,
Yes.
right? And or maybe you sort of jump over one wave and you jump over another one, right? And you're sort of like, that's, I think, one way of doing it. The other way is to swim out a bit and actually surf on the waves, right? And the surfing on the waves is to say, the way that at least I think about this metaphor is to say, rather than seeing these things coming at me as a threat
Yes.
or as something that's going to make my life harder or something to be overcome, I see them as an opportunity for joy,
Yes.
right? I see change as a way in which I can do things. There was a moment, man, it must have been like 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, that a lot of organizations were saying, we're a digital company, right? GE was one of the first. They
Yes.
said, we're not an engineering company. We're a digital company. I think that organizations need to start saying to themselves, we are a change company,
Hmm.
right? Whatever it is that we do, the actual stuff that we sell or things like that, is secondary to the fact that as an organization, we are embracing and acknowledging and enjoying and enthusiastically jumping into the surf and
Hmm.
finding a way to say, wow, this is actually really cool, rather than, oh God, not another one.
How can we go back to the old path?
Exactly. How can I resilient, right? How can I go back to the form that I had before? Which again, I mean, I get it. Like I'm old, right?
Yes.
Like this change. Oh gosh, I wish things were the way that they were when I was a kid, but they're
Yes.
not,
They're not.
right? And I think that you kind of have a choice at some point. And I think the real difference for me, back to your first question around 2017, is the real difference for me is I think that pre-COVID, pre all these things, stuff like this, you still kind of had the option to say, I want things to stay the way they are,
Yes.
and I'm just going to hold on. And you could probably make it through if you were lucky and you got a couple of things right.
Yes.
I'm not sure that that's true anymore.
Yeah. There is not an option to stay like the same or to stay in this
Yeah,
old way. So I want to finish with like I want to just like change a bit because I know our time is
sure.
like past, but I always ask for like a 10 minutes, extra, especially if the conversation is this exciting. So human skills. Like, when we look at like World Economic Forum, I talked to
Hmm.
actually a professor from Harvard Business School like who's one of the people who co-founded the Managing the Future of Work. And when we're
Cool.
asking them, okay, what's next for us?
Hmm.
Like, he was mentioning that the things that we were trained for and we were qualified for in the very near future already, it's going to be replaced by AI. And
Sure.
what's going to be left? It's more our human skills, our social skills, how we influence, how we analyze, how we create,
Hmm.
how we collaborate. But again, unfortunately, these were the things that it were called soft skills, so that they're going to
Hmm.
become unimportant. They were already like too feminine, pushed
Hmm.
aside. Do you have any insights on how leaders can somehow, again, in the past, this was not an important, but the
Hmm.
present and future is really asking for a different kind of skills.
Hmm.
How can we start somehow changing this mindset, but also somehow embracing these human skills so that we can unlock that human potential, besides AI? Like what would be the path forward to that, you think?
Like this is such a good question. I think I've got all sorts of bits of answers to it. I think that one of the unfortunate short stories is that a lot of the folks who write and think about these types of things are people who have a lot of those soft skills, right? Like the empathy, the listening, the
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff, which, as you say, are not as valued in organizations, right? And so folks like me, I would put myself as kind of the card carrying member of that group, wander around saying, this stuff's really important. One of the unfortunate things, perhaps, is that AI is actually really good at that stuff too,
Mhm.
right? Like from an empathy perspective, and I don't know all the studies and stuff, but they've done studies on AI in conversation with people, right? And
Yes.
coaching and psychotherapy and doctors and stuff. And AI is better than we are at empathy.
Oh my goodness. What does
And it's
that
terrifying,
mean?
right?
Yeah.
We don't want that to be true because
Yes.
this is like my thing, right? Empathy. That's the thing that I use. AI, and that's AI today, right? 6 months from now, it's going to be even better than it is today, right? So let's be a bit cautious of saying, yes, soft skills are really important, right? Like, I don't know,
Mhm.
right? And I think that it's interesting. There's something on LinkedIn recently. Somebody was posting about AI and coaching and how they've done these studies that show that AI is not as good at coaching. I've read a bunch of those studies, and a lot of them are based upon an outdated model of AI, right? There's a reason why all sorts of people that I know use AI as a therapist,
Mhm.
right? And it's because it's not bad at it and it doesn't judge you and it doesn't make mistakes in the sense that it listens to what you say and it'll remember what you say. Now, all sorts of concerns. There's lots of stories about people who
Biases, exactly.
really
Yeah.
tragically have killed themselves because AI
Yes.
goes haywire and tells them all the wrong thing. I get it, right? But it's kind of like driverless cars in the sense that like the accident ratios for driverless cars are significantly lower than they are for humans.
Mhm.
Now, do they still make mistakes? Sure. But the way it is now, statistically, you're probably much safer in a driverless Uber than you are in a human driven Uber, right? Now, the terrifying, right? But it's getting there. Anyway, so that's, I guess, neither here nor there. I think what the opportunity,
Yes.
when I think about this, what the opportunity for humans is AI technology is designed to achieve a purpose. It is using a set of things as a means towards a given end.
Mhm.
To go back to, and I'm going to get a bit wonky in the sense of like Immanuel Kant and this notion of morality,
Yes.
the opportunity for us in this moment is to actually see things as ends in and of themselves. Now, Abraham Maslow, who Maslow's
Yes.
pyramid, right? And self-actualization is at the top of that.
Yes.
Actually, no, right?
Mhm.
Maslow, after writing all that and getting famous, did more research and he said, actually, there's a level above that. And it's the level of self transcendence. It's the level where you stop seeing yourself as the center of everything and you start seeing something else as the center of everything. Right?
Mhm.
In my own personal view, in a work meaning context, there are two things that you can center. One is your craft, the actual thing that you do, whatever that is, right? You're
Mhm.
assembling AirPods, you're coaching people,
Yeah.
you're sweeping the streets. But in doing the thing that you do, you lose yourself and your identity in the thing. So the thing doesn't become, I sweep the streets so I can make money so I can do these things, is I sweep the streets to do a really good job sweeping the streets.
Mhm.
And then the second thing is community, right?
Yes.
Unlike that earlier idea in meaning of work of connectedness, where I get this sense of meaning because I'm connected to something and I feel a part of it, it's saying the community exists apart from me. I'm a member of it, but it exists without me. It doesn't need me to exist. And I'm going to serve that community, not because of something I want from it, but because it has a value in and of itself.
Okay. Love
So
that.
I'm getting a bit
Yeah.
philosophical, right? And I
No,
can
no, but
ground it
that's
again. But
exactly
the
no, but that's exactly how I think what we are already craving in terms of human connections, sense of
correct.
community, purpose, like, as a bigger thing. But one thing that I want to bring to this that is
Mm-hmm.
quite sad to say is that our non-for-profit sectors have been the leading organizations to somehow tap into that purposeful work,
Mm-hmm.
work for the community, like how we can serve. However, their cultures were never aligned necessarily
Mm-hmm.
with their objectives. So they always had a greater like vision.
Yeah.
But when it comes to their cultures, I think that it's somehow still like falling into the trap of corporations burning out people, not paying them enough. So
Yeah.
my follow-up question now, as you're saying that, is that how can we just bring the morality up, as you say, or like somehow think that this is what we're doing,
Yeah.
but in the structure that is also serving our people?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not an expert in not-for-profits, and I think that probably like any other type of organizations, there's good ones and bad
Bad
ones,
ones
right?
as
And I
well.
think the
Yep,
fact that they have this ostensibly service-minded mission doesn't necessarily make them good cultures. And
exactly.
I think it goes back to the conversation we had earlier, which is that the alignment of strategy and culture, right? That
Hmm.
I, you can't say we're committed to helping people and then burn out your employees, right? Like the two just don't work together.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's true that in a lot of organizations, there's some really interesting studies on this about how meaning in the sense of calling. There's a very famous one. Bunderson and Thompson wrote a study about zookeepers
Yes.
and how actually zookeepers are actually ridiculously exploited from a worker perspective because they're so called to do this work that they do
Hmm.
6 month unpaid internships. They get paid nothing. They do this horrible, but it's because they have this sort of almost other side of their income, which is the sense of doing this thing
Yes.
that's meaningful. That's not fair, right? To like do that. Um, what I hope, if we can end perhaps on hope.
Yes.
What I hope is that as these technologies come into our lives, and I've talked about this in a variety of other contexts, right? As these technologies come into our lives and show us just how performative our lives have become and how
Hmm.
perhaps in some ways meaningless our lives have become, right? Just the song and dance of being a human being in today's society of Instagram and Facebook, and I'm on this and I'm showing everybody, look how great my life is, woo, right? Or even in an HR context, which I spend a
Yes.
lot of my time thinking about, we're doing these performance reviews and we've got to fill in these forms. And AI is just going to come in and slopify, right? It's going to put just so much more volume of all that stuff that hopefully my hope is that we will pop out of that into a return perhaps to a much more human form of interaction. And as we do that, hopefully more people will start to say, hey, you know what? What really makes me happy is helping people,
Hmm.
is doing things from a sense of craft, whatever the thing is that I like to do, if it's programming or coding or making pottery or whatever, but doing it from a sense of I want to do this thing to do the best that I can of it, and doing things from a sense of community. And I am always optimistic and
Yes.
very, very hopeful that we'll get there as human beings,
Yep.
hopefully sooner rather than later.
Louder than later.
But the
And I have to say that
that little dip is going to be tricky.
yes, the little dip is going to be tricky, but I totally agree with you that it is a great opportunity this time
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
us to be more humans, basically.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just it's just that's the opportunity. So thank you so much, Mike,
My
for
pleasure.
joining me. I know that you're super busy, but for sharing all this wisdom and giving all this insights, because I think that just having these exchanges will give a little bit of, I don't know, insights or information to leaders that are thinking a bit differently about what's coming or what can we build in the future.
Well, and who knows, right? But hopefully it's been of some use.
Awesome. For sure it will be. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.